Welcome to this episode of the DNF1 podcast. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the fallout from the first race of the season, the Australian Grand Prix.
What are you going on about, mate?
The Australian Grand Prix? That's what we're covering in the podcast, right?
Yeah, it was cancelled. Where you've been hiding all this time.
What?
Yeah, it was cancelled.
Nah. Lewis Hamilton won, didn't he?
No. The virus one. Yeah, the virus always wins.
So what are we going to talk about?
I'm sure we'll find stuff.
Oh.
Life goes on.
Bear with us, guys. Just a few technical difficulties, and we'll be back with you just in a moment. So hello there, good evening or good morning or wherever you are around the world listening to this. So yes, this is the DNF1 podcast, episode 5 now. So we're still going strong despite everything that's going on in the world. Hopefully wherever you are well and you are keeping safe and obviously following the health advice that's been given to you wherever you are. So my name is Adam Burns, one of the hosts on this show, and joining me once again is my co-host Courtney Pine.
Good evening, ladies and gents.
So Courtney, how are you doing? You keeping safe, keeping your hands clean?
I'm keeping very clean in every possible way.
Says that while he scratches his nose.
This is why we need cameras.
Yeah, I know, to be fair, you're almost conscious of this half the time, but you're almost like without instinct. I think I was on the train last week, home from work, and I realised I was sort of playing a game on my phone anyway, and I clean my phone screen anyway, so it's not really an issue, but I remember almost halfway to touching my face because I had a bit of an itch and then stopped halfway.
Did you have a moment?
Yeah, I had a moment where I just stopped halfway.
Did you have an existential crisis?
Not that kind. Not that kind in a crowded public place like the tube. No.
No. I'm going to trigger you. Rub's eye. It's a serious matter.
We took literally less than a minute to ruin this already. So, yeah, and I literally stopped halfway and just reminded myself, no, don't, because I hadn't washed my hands at the time I was on the tube. I wasn't touching anything. It was because the tube's filthy anyway. In London, dirty tube. Yes. I think we'll start with the news, Courtney. So what is in the news this week?
The news is great. The news, as everyone knows, the news is fantastic. Everything's come to a standstill, hasn't it? So we're a Formula 1 podcast, so we are going to focus on the impacts it's had on Formula 1, and it's looking...
So that's obviously the coronavirus that we're talking about.
Yeah,
and, obviously the big story.
What else could we possibly be talking about?
No, this is very much becoming the weekly coronavirus podcast rather than... I think we've talked about this more than actual Formula 1, but...
The big news is, Adam Burns, is the C word has stopped Formula 1 from happening until, looks like June, as of this point.
Yeah, so the coronavirus, it's been announced last week, on Thursday it was, by the World Health Organization. This has now been upgraded to a pandemic rather than an epidemic. As for those of you that will follow me on Instagram, I would have talked about this on a few videos on my story. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but this centres around what happened in Melbourne. So pretty much the story was that the Australian Grand Prix, despite these concerns and issues that people had, and they've just hosted a Cricket World Cup final in the women's T20 for 86,000 people.
Which we did champion last week.
Yes, so it looked like they were ready to host this race. Everything was going ahead as normal. And then on Thursday night, you had one of the McLaren mechanics came down with some symptoms that were coronavirus symptoms, and unfortunately they tested positive. Now, there are a few Haas mechanics and a Williams one as well that also came down with symptoms. Fortunately, they came back negative, so they were okay. But despite the concerns, and it seemed to go ahead, this was really the trigger, the catalyst almost, to what then followed. So the strangest part was, we all kind of sat here, we were following the news as it was going. Obviously, we weren't there because we're not journalists, we don't get paid to
But
go
we were
there.
obviously keeping an eye on it. Because
Yeah. And we were watching the news, we were watching to see if there were any updates. We expected the race after that to kind of be cancelled.
Yeah,
we
a vague idea, yeah.
But that didn't really happen, though, did it? Because it was a very strange situation.
It was only a matter of hours before practice that it was actually cancelled.
Yeah, and the problem was that a lot of the teams that were there, some of them were of the opinion that the race should be cancelled and were packing up ready to go home.
Yeah.
And then there were others, not going to name names, one, because I don't really know, they don't really disclose that, and two, it'd be embarrassing for them, so I'm not going to shame them on this.
I'm sure a big name would be
I think
absolutely angry by the opinions of a podcast based on the Isle of Dogs.
Yeah, maybe that you never know. They had something to listen to on the flight home.
Our first lawsuit after 5 episodes.
I'm surprised it took us 5, but maybe with everything going on, they just haven't got around to sending that angry email.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no one's there to answer the emails. You get to be talking to a brick wall.
We haven't hired someone yet. We've got one of those. Do you know that little device we got that looks like a woodpecker or a bird, and it's got water at the bottom, and you fill it up at an angle, and then it tilts? I don't know,
but yeah.
You know the one? I think it was in a Simpsons episode once. The one that just keeps pressing the key.
Oh, wow, that's a throwback.
Homer wanted to buy it. Yeah.
And anyone born before 2000 after 2000 will have no idea what we're talking about.
I know, it's really sad.
But you know what though? Off on a little tangent. Don't judge The Simpsons by how it is now. Watch the 90s episodes, they're actually quite good.
Those were brilliant. That was classics. That's the reason that show's been on the air for 30 years? Nearly 30 years now?
Yeah.
I think it was 1993, because it was a short back in the late 80s for like a couple of minutes. And then it got
I'm loving this tangent so much, please continue.
This is a Formula 1 podcast, but we'll get back onto that. So McLaren mechanic tested positive for coronavirus.
Yeah.
The teams convened for a meeting. Obviously, some decided they wanted to have it cancelled, some didn't. And there was so much confusion because we expected the event to just be cancelled. There were loads of fans coming in from around the world, and or in Australia more specifically, to come to this event, and yet there was no communication.
It was poor.
Yeah, it was really poor, like really piss poor. Like I'm not the sort of person that loses their rag over these sorts of things with sport too much. I mean, obviously there's passion.
Joking aside, you're not actually a letter writer.
No, I'm not that kind. I mean, I feel like I might get to a certain age. Maybe I'll aspire to that level of pettiness. But I'm not quite there yet. This is what the podcast is for. This is a more modern way of ranting. And it's my podcast and yours as well. So I feel like I'm obliged almost to rant if I want to.
You're better at ranting without swearing, so I'm going to leave that stuff down to you.
No, I cut out the swearing. That's the difference.
Gaps.
But this has always been the problem with
Anyway,
this has always been the problem with Formula 1 is that it just... I'll put it this way, that when the world deals with certain events, not necessarily crisis, but certain events where the world has to come together and deal with it, Formula 1 doesn't really coincide with that, the Formula 1 world. Not to say that they don't help out or don't help when they need to, of course they do, but the Formula 1 world goes on. It's its own little bubble, and because of this, it's not really equipped to deal with a situation.
Real life issues.
Real life issues like this. The show just goes on as normal. There might be some tributes. I remember 2001 when 9/11 happened. Obviously everyone was... It was a tribute race in Italy. That was the first race afterwards. And Formula 1 carried on as normal. Of course, the noticeable feature was the Ferraris removed all their sponsorship off their cars and had black noses. So their front end was completely blacked out of respect. You had the incident, obviously, where the former Pope, John Paul II, died back in 2005, I think it was. No, 2006, sorry, not 2005. And there was a few tributes. Jarno Trulli, Italian driver for Toyota, was having, tributed his car to him.
Well, even last year when Charlie Whiting died.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And it's been a year since Charlie Whiting died, and the sport could definitely have used his insight in this situation. I will say that much. It definitely missed Charlie's input in terms of what the right action was to take. And eventually they did come to the right decision, but I think...
They left it too late.
Left it way too late. And not to mention that this was
there
always...
Confusion. There was confusion even like within the media. Like, we're seeing it. It was both... Because we was obviously talking as it was happening live.
Yeah, I mean, the strangest thing is all the stories I was hearing from the media during the event was... they were praising the FIA for the action they were taking. Everyone was saying good things, like, oh yes, this race can get going. Yes, maybe we were excited because it was race week, the season's finally getting underway, but everyone was talking up the strategy, saying, yeah, we're not going to let this affect us, we're not going to let this adversity, we're going to go on, the show must go on. And then it got to a point where Lewis Hamilton, and we talk about Lewis quite a lot on this podcast so far, amongst other drivers, but Lewis is showing that character and that sense for moral ethics and that knowledge of what's going on in the real world. That he so often does on his social media pages. If you don't follow him, just have a look. You see some of the stuff he does, and once again, he comes out as the leader.
He very much is a leader at the moment.
No one was really saying their thoughts. Of course, other drivers like Sebastian Vettel made his points clear in a direct interview afterwards.
He made a statement with actions, didn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Lewis Hamilton, he basically said he was shocked. He questioned why they were there, and that this isn't really the sort of time to be having an F1 race. There's more important things going on. Well, he mentioned the old cash is king.
That's it, he beat me to it.
Yeah, he mentioned that, and I kind of get the logic with that, because a lot of the people there, journalists and people that work in Formula One, they're out there to do their jobs. It doesn't matter what's going on. If they're told they have to go out and cover a race and the race is going on, that's where they need to be. Not to imply that Formula One does not apply to or understand moral ethics or stuff that's going on in the world, but I feel like, as I've mentioned before, the way that the world works and stuff that does happen, Formula One always seems to be transcendent from that. It seems to be a part of it. It's self-isolating in its own little bubble that the real world just doesn't really fit in. Yeah. But because of that, it's not built to cope. And the funny thing about Lewis Hamilton is that when I first heard his statement, I thought, that's really refreshing to hear that, especially from the current F1 world champion. I mean, this was the same thing that Michael Schumacher used to do. The leader of those drivers, representing Mark Webber, used to do this a lot as well. When he represented the drivers' union, Jenson Button did it. Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, they were very well. Niki Lauda,
can't forget Niki Lauda.
Even after he retired, Niki Lauda for years was almost the voice of reason, because he was the guy that was very famous for saying all the right things that needed to be said, but not really giving a shit about who cares about that.
You need people like that sometimes. We could do with a Niki Lauda or two right now to do with this global crisis.
We could have done with a Niki. I mean, we do miss Niki, and I remember watching. Obviously, I wasn't old enough to watch him when he was racing. I would have loved to, but I remember seeing some of the races, looking back on them, and some of the stuff, the way he used to carry himself, is like that was a man who didn't care about being the most unpopular person in the paddock, because he knew he was right.
Yeah.
About most things. And Lewis is the same. Like, Lewis obviously has his massive fan base, and I joke about the best fan stuff, but at the end of the day, one thing I do admire about Lewis Hamilton in this regard, and a few others in there that have this same trait, is there's no bullshit. There's no rubbish. There's no trying to, glisten over a bad situation or trying to gloss over it and think, it's fine, make light of it. He genuinely felt that they shouldn't have been there. I agreed. I'm a massive F1 fan, and couldn't wait for this season to get started. I mean, we started a podcast this year based on the premise that we were going to talk about the thing that we both enjoy, and trust us to find motivation to finally do this in the middle of a global pandemic, the biggest one since the Spanish flu in the 1920s.
Only us, mate. Only us.
I mean, that's just the more you know.
It's all right. We'll improvise. We'll improvise. It's great.
I think for me, and I'm not going to get into a grind my gears moment, although I'm really tempted.
I can see it. I can see it. You're physically trying to hold yourself back.
You guys can't see it, but there's literally steam coming out the side of my ears. There's no magic or anything. Like, this is how irate I am about this. It's the stuff that they were saying. Like, people at the FIA, the race organisers, the people holding the event, and F1 itself, they're all saying the same things. There's nothing we could do. We couldn't really predict for this sort of thing to happen. I think, look, we knew the coronavirus was a thing. We knew that it was going to become a pandemic from an epidemic. We knew that was inevitable. That's just the nature of how this virus is spreading, and from what the experts were telling us. And yet you tried to kid us all week long that this was going to be fine. We've got everything under control. We're prepared to deal with this. Even Bahrain took steps to say, look, okay, we understand the situation well enough to know that it's not safe to have fans and spectators there, so we're going to make it a participant event only. But they didn't do anything in Australia. It was almost a sense of arrogance rather than negligence. And to say that there's nothing they could do, I'm sorry, but that's absolute rubbish. It really is, because in Formula 1, and I'm going to borrow a bit of a phrasing here, so bear with me on this, but in Formula 1, it's a sport that operates purely on planning, forecasting, projecting certain outcomes and calculations.
Data. Raw data.
Using this data that they've collated to basically predict the most likely outcome or the best route to win. You don't get a team driving halfway through the race and said, I don't care what's going to happen in 15, 20 laps from now. I'm winning now. Yeah. Or you don't get, there's a rain forecast, 20 minutes time, it's going to rain. You've got to prepare yourself to compromise your strategy so that you can put wet tyres on. They go, it's fine, I'm fastest on the track, I'm in the dry tyres, I deal with it. That doesn't happen. Because, and Formula 1 seems to, in terms of the politics element, in handling this situation, have just gone on the notion that that's what they were going to do, wing it almost. Gamble with it and hope we get away with it. And if the coronavirus developed the way that it did, and then by the time they got to Bahrain, they just decided not to happen, they say, that's all right, at least we've got a race out of the way. It's just not set up to cope with this. Of course, it's a difficult situation.
But the main thing that annoys me is that there have been people that have spent a lot of money and have travelled over to Australia just to be turned away hours before practice.
Well, this is the thing, and the fact that when they sort of convened to make this decision, and then in that sort of period where everyone was sort of waiting, right, what's going to happen? It was like a 10-hour delay. No one knew what was going to happen. There were some teams that agreed that they didn't want to be there and thought it was best not to be there, so they were packing their stuff up. And then there were other teams, a few of them, that decided, no, they want to race, and were packing up their stuff to go home. But nobody was telling the fans. And when eventually the announcement did come, there were fans standing outside the gates waiting to come in.
I see,
now,
that's not right.
Because the McLaren mechanic had tested positive for this, you already know that this virus is now existing in the paddock. You need to control the spread. You have an obligation now to make sure that this doesn't get out. And yet all you're doing is just allowing loads and loads of fans to literally get to the gates about to come in. We're talking 100,000 people here that have made the journey from wherever around the world that they were in. And they're just going to be left vulnerable to this situation, to the coronavirus. And look, we're not going to talk about, this virus and the nature of it. I think we've mentioned a few times on the podcast now our thoughts on this, and we're both young, healthy men.
I like to think so, yeah.
Yeah, and we're in a position where we're not too worried about getting the virus, I think it's fair to say. But what we're concerned about the most is becoming agents of transmitting this virus onto people that are more vulnerable. Yeah. Hence why we're all taking actions to self-isolate, wash our hands, and all the other stuff.
I did, didn't I? The moment I came through the door, wash my hands.
Yeah, you did. You literally called me and said, Ad, I'm coming. Like, as soon as I get here, have you got any hand sanitizer or something I can use straight away? I'm like, yeah, sure. But and this is the thing, and at Formula 1, the FIA and the circuit organisers are just standing there saying, oh, well, this happened, we couldn't foresee this, we couldn't predict this, there's nothing we could do. And to me, I don't accept that. That's unacceptable. It's already a failure when you've got those people there. And I get that the 10-hour gap coincided with around about 2-3 a.m. in Australian time.
Yeah.
So obviously an announcement's not going to make big headlines over there or reach big news. But the fact is, when those people, those fans woke up in the morning, they'd have seen that, not made the journey. And yet people were leaving the circuit, like journalists were leaving the circuit, organisers were leaving the circuit, sponsors, drivers. Kimi Räikkönen and Sebastian Vettel had already left by Friday night, and Charles Leclerc I should say, and Lewis Hamilton had also left as well.
Well, they went surfing, didn't they?
Yeah, the only race that was going on was the race to the airport. Like literally, and Melbourne is a very active city. It's one of the liveliest cities in the world. There's always something going on there. So they were already hit massively hard by the fact that quarantine periods are now taken into effect, and big mass gatherings and events are now being postponed or even cancelled. They're already having it hard. So the last thing you want is an event like Formula 1 being attributed to a sudden spike or an increase of exposure to this virus. That is just terrible PR right there. And it's something that Formula 1, if people die as a result of this, in certain cases when they're vulnerable or in the high risk categories, you can't really forgive them for that. What, just to hold a race? I'm sorry, I mean, I'm a passionate Formula 1 fan as anybody, but That's inexcusable.
There are limits, aren't there?
There are limits, and
we're all. Well, because the thing is though, we're Formula One fans, but we are sports fans, aren't we? And we're all struggling without our sport. I know I certainly am, but we know that there are times where you just have to call it a day, and it just seems that Formula One didn't follow the example that other sports, kind of took with it. And it's a real pity that it got to that close before a race. Because I'd have been annoyed. I would have been annoyed, for example, I don't know, if West Ham were in Europe. I know quite a fault. If West Ham were in Europe and I paid up loads of money, I don't know, to just play Slavia Prague. Okay, we're playing Slavia Prague on a Thursday night, alright? Get there, get on the plane, go over there. Oh no, sorry, the game's been cancelled. What? It's not fair, because it is, as great as Formula 1 is with the raw data and everything, it seems that because they are almost so robotic, they sometimes forget about the human element to the sport.
Yeah, it just doesn't. They just don't coincide.
No.
The rest of the world, the real world, and the Formula 1 world are just two separate entities that go about their business, but they don't really fall into the other one. Whereas now, this affects everything. It's got to. I've never seen anything like this. I'm sure a lot of people will feel the same way. It's almost like, right, okay, sport is a big thing to a lot of us. I know there are some people that don't really have an interest in sport, but now it's starting to hit other areas, social activities, mass gathering, concerts, going out even to the local pub in America. They've now been telling people to shut down pubs. In Ireland, and it's St. Patrick's Day. Like, when this comes out, it's St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
So happy St. Patrick's Day to you guys out in Ireland and Northern Ireland.
I'm sure everyone's having everyone's having their generic Guinness indoors.
Well, it's a fairly good drink. It's probably a good one for choice. Not the one that we're drinking, but we're
still keeping up with the punnage, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I still had to get through this last case of Corona, which is
we're so funny.
Clever scientific.
We're so funny.
Original, yeah. Well,
original recipe.
Do you know, it's one of those old jokes I've probably seen about 4 or 5 times this last week. People go, guess what I got to drink? Corona. I'm like, did that 2 weeks ago, mate.
You know what? I got one sent to me by a good friend of mine the other day.
We're ahead of our time.
Where is it? Let me have a look. It's brilliant. And I thought, this is all me. Okay, so I'm going to read this out. Jeez,
it's going to say you're going to have to vividly describe this to our listening audience.
Okay, so you've got most of Europe, all right.
Is it real funny or Weatherspoons funny? Because there is a difference.
I like Weatherspoons funny though.
I know, but I'm wondering if. Well, all right, we'll see how this
judge
pans
it.
out.
So then we're going to judge funny or Weatherspoons funny. Let's see. Okay, so most of Europe in total shutdown. China, total shutdown. USA flights and events cancelled. And then in the UK, me and the squad in the UK singing COVID-19 to the tune of Come On Eileen.
COVID-19.
COVID-19. Come on.
Wash your hands.
There you go. Look, I understand it. But we have to get this balance right. I was against going off on this tangent, but I'm going to now. We have to get this balance right. We need to be sensible with washing the hands and everything like that. But we can't let this situation get the better of us mentally.
Yeah, no, I think a proper perspective needs to be taking precedent here.
Yeah.
I've seen so much news from so many different mediums and so many different people. I've seen governments have different opinions on this. I mean, we live in London, in Britain, so our government's operating a bit differently to everyone else. Stuff talking about herd immunity and all that stuff. I think at the end of the day, guys, the only thing we can say, and this is a mental health issue as well as a physical one.
For me, I'm more concerned about the mental health impacts and economic impacts. Again, it's the human. It's not the virus itself that's worrying me. It's the reaction to the virus.
Yeah, and I think it's a case of people getting bored of wondering what they're going to be doing with their time now that there's just so much of it because of what's going on. But all we can say,
I bought Spider-Man.
You bought the PS4?
Yeah.
That's
my way of beating on 2 weeks in quarantine.
That's a good game. You enjoy that.
Other games are available.
You still got DBZ Kakarot to finish as well.
I'm a level 107 Saint at the moment, but you can get up to level 250.
Yeah, so I've seen. I'm up to 160.
Fuck.
I've been spamming training, mate. Like literally in that training with Android 21, I've been spamming training to fight all these other enemies.
So fucking nerdy.
I think that's the way with that game, because I feel like there's going to be more content they might produce in the future, like DLC content, and the aim of it is like if you add like Goku and you continue to train despite times of peace, the enemies are going to be of massive level. And if you're not prepared for
I've got a plot twist.
What's that?
They could do like a DLC version of the game where instead of getting heart virus, Goku actually gets a coronavirus and then Trunks comes back with a vaccine.
Or a pack of tissues.
Yeah,
just tells him to stay at home for a week.
I'm really sorry if you don't like Dragon Ball, you have no idea what we're talking about. I'll tell you what, if you're bored at home, watch Dragon Ball. There we go.
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, but it's funny. Could you imagine that Trunks? Like, we're just going to go for the Dragon Ball fans. You know exactly what we're talking about.
You're going to have to put a picture up on the YouTube video.
Oh god, yeah. I'll try to, but I'm worried Toei might copyright the video. But
rest in peace, Dragon Ball Abridged.
I'm just. Yeah, that one was gone.
Anyway, sorry.
It's just imagining the point where Trunks comes back from the future to tell Goku he's got instead of the heart virus, coronavirus. He said, "Have you got a vaccine for it?" I said, "No, it is a pack of tissues. Stay at home for a week."
Oh wow! But people are going to know what we're talking about.
Chi would love that. Yeah, but then Goku comes out a day later. I want to train. No. Anyway, Formula 1 fans were listening in a rage now because of how much we've gone out this week.
After that, I've got a bit of breaking news to give the audience.
Oh, what?
In case you didn't know, both me and Adam are single.
Are we?
How about that? The shock. Can you imagine that? Oh, my God, these guys that spent 5 minutes talking about Dragon Ball in a podcast are single. No, I don't believe that.
I thought I'd give them credit to think that they probably would have figured that one out.
No.
By about halfway, about 10 minutes into episode 1, we were talking about beavers' mouths and tight rear ends. So,
yeah, that was you.
But, I think the interesting thing with this coronavirus debate in Formula 1 was that the teams, for once, operated on a united front in most regards to how bad this was and that the event shouldn't go ahead. Of course, there were one or two that objected at first, but everyone agreed it was the right decision. But then the funny part was, there were some other things that were being debated over legality issues, and the amazing thing was you have one issue like this where they're all in a meeting together and everyone's unanimously agreeing with what they need to do with this. And then immediately afterwards, another issue comes up for debate, and then they talk about the legality of this and legality, and they're all at loggerheads again. So I'll give you examples. So there were some technical stuff that was being debated over the legality of. So I'll start with the DAS system, the dual axis steering system that Mercedes may or may not have incorporated on their car for Australia that they brought out in testing so famously. For those of you that are interested in how it works, I did talk about that in episode 2, I think it was, during the first test review. So do watch that or listen to that.
We're going to have time to do so you might as well listen to our podcast.
I'm not going over it again. That took me like a long time to get it right, and that was like the best 5-6 minutes of my podcasting career by far.
You did look like you enjoyed yourself.
I was having a great time. I would have made Ted proud. Straight out the notebook and into my pad. But yeah, so Red Bull were in talks with Mercedes over this, and they did say to them, I think Helmut Marko did allude to this, he did say that if Mercedes bring out this DAS system, they're going to repeal it and try to basically get it outlawed.
Now,
that's a strong statement, and I'm not surprised by this, because the reason why Red Bull are so against this DAS system, and we talked about this before, how some teams may look at the benefits or the feasibility of incorporating it to their cars, even though it's only going to be legal for a season. Obviously, how much of the season we get is a different thing that we'll talk about later. But the Red Bull, the way that the front end was rearranged, and I looked at the schematics for the DAS system compared to the schematics of the Red Bull front end, and maybe my basic knowledge of aerodynamics and Formula 1 technical analysis.
For sure.
Basic compared relative to the professionals who get paid a lot of money to get this right. And therefore should be respected on this. But it didn't look like there was a way that they could incorporate into their car that was deemed feasible. Of course, if they had more time and this DAS system was not being ruled out in 2021, then yeah, maybe they would have given it more of a go. And Ferrari also mentioned that they didn't feel it was feasible for them because they didn't see the benefits. Maybe they just didn't understand it. But yeah, so Red Bull basically said, if you're going to use it, we're going to repeal it and try and get it outlawed. No surprise there.
No.
There was also the rear suspension and rear brake ducts on the Mercedes that was found to be in breach of a FIA technical directive, which they were told that they would have to change. Of course, we didn't get to see that on track for obvious reasons. And obviously the investigations that continue into the Tracing Point car, the old Racing Point RP20 or W10, for some people like to call it. That was going to be looked into a bit more scrutinised at the race weekend, but obviously that didn't happen. So there were some other issues. And then I think that brings us along to the issue with the Ferrari power unit debate. I mean, all this business of the coronavirus, I would say, has kind of distracted everyone or moved their attentions away from this. So
jammy,
a little bit.
Just about to get exposed, and then
the conspiracy theories are coming out now. You've got someone, that guy on the whiteboard with all the pictures and the arrows and everything else goes, this is how Ferrari and the FIA avoid the issue of the power unit legality by...
It's definitely the coronavirus. I have no doubts about that. Believe
me, I can imagine there's probably someone somewhere right now with conspiracy about this, saying that this was an agent released by the FIA. Do you know what? I mean, conspiracy theories are sometimes funny, especially the alien ones.
But it's when they're being genuinely serious and you're just reading like.
It's the fact that there's some people that see these and they're like, oh my god, this makes so much sense.
They just have too much time on their hands, that's the problem.
Yeah, too much time. Well, we've all got too much time on our hands now.
Well, we don't know, that's why we started a podcast.
Yeah, that's it keeps us busy.
Yeah, it makes us like have half the time a logical explanation instead of running away with our own minds.
Yeah, and looking on conspiracy theories if I need a good giggle on a Friday night.
Why not?
Oh, how am I still single? How are you still single?
Oh, stop it, you.
Should we make a pact? One of them packed in 45 years. Well, we don't do that. Anyway, I think we will use this as an opportunity now to take a break now. So
I think that's perfect timing.
Yeah, so coming up in the next part, we're also going to be answering some of your questions that we've asked about. Yeah, it's going to be good. And we're also going to be talking about the impact of esports and how that has got a massive role to play now to help fill the void now that the coronavirus has had its impact on the Formula 1 and sporting world. So do join us after the break for part 2. Get yourself a hot beverage, something to eat, relax, and we'll see you in the next part.
See you soon.
So hello there and welcome back to the second part of the DNF1 podcast. We've gone over to talk over the issues with the coronavirus that we've been discussing, and now we're going to be answering some of your questions that you've been feeding us the last week. So Courtney has got the questions written down on his pad. So that's what he's using his pad for. Saying that I need a brand new one probably. I've already filled mine.
It doesn't make sense. I've got the bigger pad, you've got the smaller one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to need...
It should probably be the other way around.
Well, I kind of started, so you're going to have to finish that one, but size isn't everything.
These things are rarer than toilet paper these days. So, let's get on with the questions. Okay, so, first of all, George Allen, hello George, has asked, if the coronavirus gets even worse, do you think the whole season will be suspended?
So we just talked about the coronavirus. The first question is on the coronavirus.
We'll just lead on from where we started.
Right, okay, so... That's a good question. Answer is that at the moment we don't know, but there's no plan in place, or there's no one talking really about the possibility of this season not even happening. I mean, it's funny because there was an article that Autosport had made that was meant to be like a hypothetical situation, like should the 2020 season just be scrapped, and this was before winter testing had started. Should the 2020 season be scrapped to allow the teams to put more resource and effort into 2021?
I remember you actually spoke about it in an earlier episode.
And it was a good article. It is very thought-provoking. I would recommend people that haven't read it, that are interested, definitely look. It's on autosport.com. It's a good piece. And the writer, unfortunately, did get a lot of stick over this. A lot of people really raging on it. I didn't understand why. But it was an interesting topic to talk about. It's really worth a read. But moving on to this situation that we find ourselves in now, before that age world jokes. The issue is it's two things. One, when is the season going to start? And so there's plans in place for that first question, where at this time, obviously Australian Grand Prix has been cancelled. That's not coming back this season. There's not really a time to put it back, and the conditions aren't going to work for it. And it's a street circuit as well, which gets so much use throughout the year as a normal road and area. You just can't really incorporate that any time of the year, so that's not happening. Bahrain's been cancelled, and so has the Vietnam race. We know the China race had already been cancelled and postponed anyway, although they are looking at revising that later on, but that may just get cancelled altogether now. But the Vietnam race is a real blow because...
It's brand new, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a brand new circuit. And the thing is with brand new circuits like this, there's a lot of money and a lot of sponsorship and investment from governments and big companies and firms in that area with the commitment and the promise that this is good, they're going to be a part of this event and it's going to pay them back in a big way and return for them financially. Because this isn't going to happen now, this could create serious implications for the future of that race already. We haven't even had one yet. And in the way, it's the same with Zandvoort, which also is probably not going to go ahead either. And Zandvoort was meant to happen at the end of April. That's probably not going to happen now. And the big draw with Zandvoort was, one, it was a former circuit that did need to be redeveloped to allow modern Formula 1 cars. It hadn't raced there since the 90s, since the early 90s. And Max Verstappen, the Red Bull driver, biggest commodity in Formula 1 right now, a lot of talent, 8 times a Grand Prix winner, and touted as a future champion. And that Dutch fan base, the Orange Army, if you like, the Verstappen fans, huge amount of support from those guys. They travel in their absolute hordes. I've never seen anything like it for a long time. But this race isn't going to go ahead now. And the problem is there's the money issue with that. All the investment into these races to host this Grand Prix, and now it's not going to happen. It does create doubt in future years over whether or not those Grand Prix will be sustainable now that these companies will say, okay, we put loads of money into this, and they had to pay a lot of money up front to host these races. There's very few races on the calendar that don't fall into this pocket. For example, Monaco is basically a free race. The organisers don't pay to host this Grand Prix.
But when you say that's the race that gets like the most like mainstream exposure for the sport.
Yeah, it's kind of like the one-off. Yeah. If there was going to be
it's like the Cheltenham.
Yeah, if there was going to be a race where you'd put the diamond in the crown for Formula 1, it's definitely Monaco.
Yeah. Because the race itself isn't actually interesting. It's the sticks. But
I mean, it's great and fun to watch them go on the street circuit, but there's always that element to it. But in terms of the actual races, you're not going to go, oh wow, that was an absolute classic at Monaco. The last classic at Monaco was back in Senna held off Mansell.
Mansell, yeah.
Was it 92 in the McLaren against the Williams? He just held him off for so long. And we've had races like that. Ricciardo's redemption race in 2018, Verstappen,
Lewis holding off Verstappen.
Yeah, Lewis holding off Verstappen. Like in that year, obviously the messed up strategy for Mercedes, where Hamilton ended up losing a win because his team had pitted him unnecessarily. That kind of stuff. But
they reckon it's going to start in Azerbaijan in June. Don't
so that's the target. In Baku. Even as people did mention the likelihood of Monaco maybe hosting this race, and because it's a free race, it's not like a case of okay, we're going to lose money on this.
Yeah,
but even they're saying so far in advance, saying, oh, I don't know, it's not really looking likely. And if the coronavirus is still a big deal and uncontrolled, we don't really want that here.
I think the hope is that the warmer temperatures across Europe will kill off the virus. I think that's what people are hoping. We don't know for sure whether that's going to happen, but I think that's what people are hoping for.
The fact that people are attributing this virus in the same family as likes of flu, colds and stuff like that, logic would dictate that may be the case. However, I don't know anywhere near enough about this, so I'm not going to comment on it too much.
Don't, but I feel that could be the hope that they're going with. Maybe, enough people build up immunity.
Yeah.
But the combination of immunity being built up and the temperatures going up could lead to it being viable.
Maybe.
No one knows.
No, I think Baku is the target date. Yeah. In terms of the rest of the season, at the moment the target seems to be around 17 races.
Yeah.
So kind of like what we used to have about 5-6 years ago, before they moved it up to 22 this year, which seemed ambitious already. But Ross Brawn has already touted this idea to some of the teams and saying, okay, we can use the summer break, which usually happens between July and August, for about 3 or 4 weeks, where races can be put back to back in that period, that there's time to put them all in, which is viable. I think you may get a situation where he's also mentioned that some of these races, because they're going to be week after week, to ease that burden, they're going to be 2-day events rather than 3-day events. So you may get a situation where you might get qualifying happens on a Sunday morning before the actual race. which sounds fair.
Yeah,
and,
pretty good.
And then practice is all on the
and
Saturday.
I work on Saturday, so I'll be able to watch qualifying, so I'm up for that.
Well, yeah, no, practice be on Saturday, and then the Sunday. And I remember when the US Grand Prix in 2018, where practice got completely washed out, there wasn't really much running, and then you ended up with a really strange situation, is half the teams had about half an hour to an hour's worth of running to understand their cars on the circuit, and it was a great race. I mean, Kimi Räikkönen, his final win for Ferrari, it was brilliant to watch, managed to hold off Lewis Hamilton on Max Verstappen with an ingenious strategy to stop once, and made those tyres last all the way to the end of the race, so it was brilliant. But in terms of the rest of the season, the plan right now is that the FIA and Formula 1, all the teams want to get as many races as they can. I think the minimum amount of races required to be this considered a legitimate championship is around 8 to be completed.
Yeah.
So it's not like the same principle with the races in themselves where you have to complete like 75% of a race for it to be not considered null and void. I think the Malaysian Grand Prix back in 2009, when Jenson Button won, and it was absolutely monsoon, and they gave half points because he wasn't able to complete the minimum number of laps. It's nothing like that. So at the moment, with all this ambiguity going on, that's the plan. That's what they want to do. And then maybe move the Chinese Grand Prix later on at the end of the season, because that's still doable around December. But we'll see. Again, teams have got to look at 2021, the big picture. Let's assume best case scenario in the Formula 1 world, that is, despite everything going on in the football world by comparison, where that's really going to be effective for a couple of years, not necessarily just the one. The fact that in Formula 1, 2021 is such a huge season, there could be a scenario now where some of the teams were looking at whether or not to develop their cars further this season after the first few races. Well, now we're not going to get that. So you may get situations where teams say, look, considering what's happened this season, this is our car, we're just going to roll with it all for the season. We'll do some minor upgrades, but nothing major that's going to divert our resources away from a bigger project, like the 2021 changes. So in terms of championship, you may get a season now, when it does start, that whoever's on it from the get-go is going to be likely to win it, and so forth. And that's going to affect the smaller teams much more than the larger ones. So that midfield battle is providing no one decides to take advantage of the situation and steal a march. They could get fourth now, but massively compromise themselves next year. Whereas the top three teams still have more of a wider scope to work with. But I think that's how it's going to be for that far.
So just to summarise, to answer the question, the answer is the answer that anybody's given when it comes to any question asked about this virus. We just don't know. Yeah,
there's plans. This is what they want to do. And they're a lot more clear cut then, and teams are on board with what Rossborn is trying to add in. I think it's a good idea. Personally, I think it's a good idea anyway, and something that Formula 1 should consider, not just having a 3-day, but just have a 2-day weekend in general, personally, might be better and more exciting.
We need something. We need something. We need to get back to normality as soon as possible. I think that's important.
Yeah, you're right. But at this point, we don't know. This is going to be something that's going to be revised a lot, and depending on how long it takes before we get running.
And who knows? There could be a vaccine by then. We do not know.
Again, it's something we don't want to know. I mean, I've heard stories and stuff you hear on the internet, but until I hear anything approved by the WHO in particular, or the World Health Organization, I'd say, people that don't know what that means, at this point, it's best to not get sidetracked or get lured in by these stories on the internet that are claiming, they found a cure and that just to try and sell it to you. That's not what we want. So,
It's very unknown. Let's move on to the next question. So, next question is by Lucy Rosario. I do not know who this Lucy is. Hello, Luce. Anyway, she asks, what made you guys get into Formula 1?
Oh, that's a very good question. For me, I've always been one of those people that really likes fast cars and motor racing. It's something that was instilled in me when I was very, very young. I think the earliest memories I have of watching Formula 1 was 1995, when it was the Luxembourg Grand Prix. It was the one where Michael Schumacher in the Benetton back then was chasing down John Alesi in the Ferrari at the time, and it was a great race, and Schumacher caught him all the way to the end. It was a real big cat and mouse chase, and he got to him just before the chicane, before the last corner, which obviously, for those of you that don't know, you younger fans, the Luxembourg Grand Prix is now the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. So they have the German Grand Prix where they alternate between Hockenheim and the Nürburgring year on year. Well, this is the Luxembourg. It was, at the time it was in Luxembourg, this, border disputes and all that stuff aside, this is the Nürburgring circuit. Not the Nordschleife, for some of you GT Sport fans, the actual circuits track. Funny enough, where they had the esports race, but we'll get onto that later on. And yeah, it was a great race for me. And for me, I just kind of got hooked from that. Schumacher versus Alesi, Schumacher
straight in your veins.
Yeah, injected into my veins. And then you got Murray Walker going crazy on the mic at the time. It was brilliant. It was literally, for me, I was hooked from then. And I love racing ever since. And I think in a weird way, call me glory hunter if you like, but just seeing Michael Schumacher win that race, I was a Schumacher fan from then. Obviously, he moved to Ferrari.
Very much still are, of course.
Yeah, I mean, he was, and then he moved to Ferrari. Yeah, always my idol in that regard. But yeah, moved to Ferrari. So, and the rest is history. Really, that was it for me. And I did karting and stuff when I was younger. I wanted to be a Formula One driver.
I remember you in school being very into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely loved it. Yeah.
So he's talking facts. For me, not quite as beautiful as your story. I just got into the habit of I was always lucky to be blessed to have a TV in my bedroom, and I sometimes put ITV on. So particularly the Australian Grand Prix and stuff like that, I'll just watch them casually, just as I'll just casually watch it, not as a fan, just because it was on. And I saw the story about Lewis Hamilton. There's a lot of talk about him, being in GP2, which is now F2. So I've always very much, been on the persuasion to back the Brits. So I was like, there's this young British talent coming through, I'll keep an eye. And then, obviously from 2007 onwards, our first season was brilliant, with the Alonso rivalry. But I watched the sport as a Lewis Hamilton fan. I wasn't a fan of the sport, I'm not gonna lie. I just watched Lewis, rest of them are there. I watched, go on Lewis, you can do it. Just watch the guy in the yellow helmet. But with watching it, I developed a love for a sport. And also, funny enough, I went to watch Senna in the cinema with Adam. And watching that movie, watching the story of this great man, it actually helped me develop more of a love for the sport, because I felt the more kind of human element to the sport rather than just a sporting one. And from then onwards, I appreciated, the efforts these people put in. And actually, something that not bothers me as such is that people that don't like Formula One don't actually know how much character the people that drive those cars have. They just see them as boring rich kids, when in fact there are so many good characters in that sport. If you're not really into Formula One, just watch the chemistry between Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz. It's brilliant to watch.
I think the Drive to Survive series does add this element to it. Because, and I think Christian Horner put this really, really well. He said that these drivers have a fighter pilot mentality, where they almost go in unaware of the severity and the consequences potentially of what they're about to do if it all goes wrong. Now, from experience, I've never raced in a Formula One car. The best that I've had is driving a Formula Renault 3.5 series car, which was very, very quick and is very much like a baby version of a Formula One car. But when you're in there and you're racing around, I remember in an incident at Brands Hatch when I was driving around in one of them, and a few guys have sort of gone into each other and caused an incident. And I was coming down the hill after turn one, where there's a bank and it goes very steep and you can't really see over the top of that hill until you hit that corner. And by then you're already going flat out over the curb and just straight up to turn two. And the incident was right in front of me after that. By instinct, I've gone weaved in and out. Because if I'd slammed on the brakes, my car would have bottomed out and I would have spun and it would have crashed. But I just, by instinct, just kept going, swerved around them, avoided the incident and carried on. Now, that was a potentially really dangerous situation, but that never crossed my mind of how dangerous that could have been.
So the adrenaline rush though, isn't it?
Yeah, and I didn't think about, obviously when I reflect back on it, I didn't really think about the actual incident until I got pulled into the pits, because they black flagged me for that, because I overtook under yellow flags, and the mechanic, the engine, whoever it was who was coordinating, the marshal actually it was, he lifted up, he comes towards me and he asked me to open my visor, and he said, "Do you know what you just did? What we pulled you in for?" And I said, "Yeah, I overtook under yellow flags." And he said, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "Because if I didn't, I'd have crashed."
Yeah.
And just literally just as confident as that. And he tried to explain the severity of what I did. And I said, yeah, but the fact is that if I did, there would have been a crash. And there were people coming behind me that wouldn't have seen it. So it would have been a massive pile-up. Been similar to the Days of Thunder, that pile-up with Tom Cruise in that film where he has that crash. Or even Cars at the beginning of that film. But it's similar to that, potentially. I guess my point is that these guys, you don't really get into the mindset of these people, what they are as characters. You kind of see them as these robots, these heroes, these untouchable characters that get into these fast cars, drive around, and then they plug stuff on their social media pages and everyone follows them, but you don't really get to know them inside out. The series does that really well, and I really enjoy that element of it.
I fully recommend people watch it, because it isn't just this general theme about Formula 1 if you're not a fan, and things I hear regularly are, I only watch the first lap and the last lap. That's what I always hear.
Or they drive around in circles.
Well, around in circles, la 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 la. But there's something in that's being brought in the sport in recent seasons. A lot of people aren't aware of this, and I think it's a great feature. I think it's actually transformed it. Is the radio messages. The radio messages are brilliant. Honestly, if you have time whilst you're in self-quarantine, look up Formula 1 radio messages. Honestly, the drama is brilliant.
I think the Kimi Räikkönen messages on their own are just hilarious.
Especially
the steering wheel one.
Because they're all so desperate to win, and they've grown up being used to winning, and they're used to getting what they want. Generally speaking, that's a broad statement. I'm not saying they're all the same, but they're used to getting what they want. They're used to winning, and when things don't go their way, they hate it. And you can feel the raw emotion live on broadcast, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant to listen to. I don't know about you, but it's a brilliant feature that they brought in.
Yeah, and they do mention this in the Drive to Survive series as well. Although I find that series a bit strange, and for one reason only, is the fact that everything in there seems to happen on the last lap.
Yeah,
when you watch it, it's the last lap.
And
I remember watching it back, I'm like, no, it wasn't. That wasn't the last lap. That was like, you took footage from something that happened early in the race and used it there. I said, no, it weren't.
I'm gonna plug one particular incident.
Yeah.
Okay, and the radio message. You can look them up on YouTube. Look up 2016 Mexican Grand Prix radio messages.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about.
Absolutely I remember watching it live and I thought, this sport is brilliant.
Yeah.
People, because around the time, because that was the time when Mercedes dominated, and I think it might have been a Mercedes 1-2.
That's the one where old little Sebastian Vettel kind of lost his cool a little bit at being the only driver to get penalised for the Verstappen rule. The Verstappen rule, for those of you that don't know, is basically the rule that was incorporated because Max Verstappen used to move his car at the very last minute under braking, and it was potentially dangerous. And then what happened was they moved this rule in to stop that sort of happening because it was getting really, really dangerous. I think Kimi said he's going to cause a massive accident, and he was right. He probably would have done. But then in the Mexican Grand Prix, Sebastian was chasing down Verstappen, who was holding him up. He cut the track to avoid Vettel passing him, wouldn't let him back through, and then he was backing him into Ricciardo. And then what happened was Ricciardo tried for a lunge on Vettel, and Vettel did move the slightest amount under braking, but it was enough to deem it a penalty. And Vettel reacted by the most hilariously aggressive way possible by literally just having a massive swearing rant on the radio whilst driving a car left and right around the streets of Mexico at 200 miles an hour.
Beautiful.
You want to play it, didn't you?
I do.
Okay, so for the benefit of this, I'm going to put it on here for you guys so you listen to it now.
Sake. He's a... That's what he is. I mean, am I the only one? Or are you not seeing what I'm seeing? He's just backing me off into Ricciardo. I mean, honestly, I'm going to hit someone. I think I have a puncture. Rear left.
But tires are fine.
He has to give me the position. End of the story.
Charlie said...
Yeah, you know what? Here's the message for Charlie. Off. Honestly. Off.
Okay,
Sebastian, calm down. They are under investigation. I know that is not fair, but calm down. Put your head down, and then we talk afterwards.
Okay, could be more.
I mean, yeah, there you go. So,
I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did watching it live.
Explicit, I think, is the right word for that one. So, yeah. But, I mean, That's just how it was back then. But I mean, for me as well, politics I think is important with these issues as well. I mean, I was just looking through, and we were talking about the Ferrari power unit, how that kind of went away. I read a rumour actually. I think Motorsport's Italian website picked up on this from the Corriere del Sport, that John Elkann, the Ferrari president, and Ola Kelleus, the Daimler president, who has ties with Mercedes, they reportedly, I should say, they had a phone call last week and sort of verbally agreed that Mercedes and also their customer teams as well would not put further pressure on the FIA regarding the power unit matter. Now, long story short, the issue over the FIA back and forth over their lack of transparency on this settlement with Ferrari regarding the power unit, and obviously the 7 non-Ferrari powered teams want closure on this and want them to confirm whether or not Ferrari were actually in breach of the FIA regulations. Since then, it's gone back and forth, and now, if this is true, that could potentially mean that there are now 6 teams, including the FIA as well on this, that do not see this issue going any further, whereas the likes of Red Bull, Renault, McLaren and AlphaTauri...
It's got like an almost 50-50 divide going on.
Yeah, almost, but it's swung the other way now. Yeah. So it's almost a case where if that's true, it may go away. But obviously the reasoning for this and the rationale may not necessarily be just this, but they don't want to put more pressure on the FIA while they're doing the coronavirus.
It's very true.
Whether that comes back, though, when this situation is
depends how competitive Ferrari are.
We'll see.
That's what it comes down to at the end of the day.
But it's that politics element that as you get older, as a Formula 1 fan, I've been a Formula 1 fan for well over 20 years, I just wanted to watch the cars go fast and see like my favourite drivers win. Now, the politics stuff it's kind of, I think,
and it's a drama.
I think wrestling's a good example. Professional wrestling, like WWE, for example. When you're a kid, you're watching your favourite superstars like The Rock, Stone Cold, Triple H, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, all of those guys. And now, obviously, you have your big stars. Obviously, you've got your mega star like John Cena, for example. But people don't really care for that too much when you're above a certain age.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I hope so, anyway.
I remember the segment The Rock would take the mick out of John Cena fans, be like 42 mummies.
Actually, scratch that. We spent 5 minutes talking about Dragon Ball and we're knocking on 30, so I'm not
That's
in a position
not the same. That's not the same, and you know it. But you find the politics element about people backstage and stuff that they're saying about other superstars and stuff like that. All of that stuff and all the politics and the contracts and all the stuff is really, really interesting. It adds an extra dynamic. That
a lot of people aren't aware of it.
No. And it happened in the 80s and the 90s. It was rife of it, particularly with Senna Prost, all of that stuff going on.
Brilliant. That's it though, and that's what I mean. Like when I watched the movie, you got the real tension in that kind of rivalry.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is the way Prost was brilliant at this. He was able to, not to manipulate it, but he was able to use that element to his advantage. Not to say that was a reason for his success, but sometimes when you know how to win under certain circumstances, it's a big trait to have, and one that all the best drivers have. Senna maybe not so much, but his was purely about what he did on the track. And that's why he, for a lot of people, is regarded as the greatest of all time.
Now, do you reckon that would be a good opportunity to move on to our next question?
Yeah, I think I know which one this is going to be, but do.
Yeah, so this is from your brother, funnily enough. First of all, Luke, I'd like to thank you for keeping the question clean for once. So that's nice to see, because you usually send me quite profound questions on my Instagram.
Yeah, we all have them in every family, one nut, and if you don't know who that is, then it's probably you.
So I'm going to ask a little question. How many Legos does it take to put a Formula 1 car together? He'll get that.
I was worried you were going to say the other thing.
Not going to. So,
how many Legos can you stick up your bum?
Luke Burns asks, Senna or Hamilton? That is a very good question, Luke.
Oh, that is a tough one.
It's very hypothetical because I think we have a vague idea of what Senna could have achieved if he hadn't have died, but unfortunately he died.
Well, there's so many unknowns
with
this. As you said, we never got to see the latter part of Senna's career. Unfortunately, fate had a different plan, very sad as it was. There's no disputing what Senna was capable of in the car.
Yeah.
There's no disputing the fact that the man was capable of winning in cars that should not have been. I mean, for example, when he was driving in the Tyrrell back in Monaco and he comes second, I think it was, in the wet, first of all, one amazing drive. Then won the championship for Lotus when he was driving in the Lotus. He was fantastic. In the McLaren, it was almost like the perfect harmony. Just watch some of the onboard footage that
Donington 93.
Yes, arguably the greatest first lap.
Yep.
In history, where he literally come from, was it 6th on the grid? He overtook everybody.
I think he ended up I could be wrong, but I think he lapped everybody.
Yeah. I think you're right, actually, yeah. And it was almost reminiscent of Lewis's performance in Britain in 2008.
Yes.
Incredible drive that was. So there's very good hallmarks to compare the two.
Yeah. Well, Lewis was always inspired by Senna.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can talk about this in a later episode. I think we've got features on some, and these are going to be some features we're going to be talking about in future episodes. Comparisons between current drivers and former drivers. Hamilton is going to get quite a lot of airtime on this podcast for that because
I usually define drivers by generation. So I feel that Lewis is the driver of his generation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say, if I'm going to cut this very, very short, if it were me, I would probably say that Senna was the better driver.
Yeah.
But if you asked me to pick one of the two to win me a world championship or win a race or get a pole position, which both of them had that trait, it's got to be Lewis. I think Lewis is the better qualifier. Lewis is clearly the better race winner. Of course, if we take to account what Senna could have achieved and the number of races Lewis has raced in more than Senna. But there's just something about Lewis, and Senna had this too, but Lewis, I think Singapore 2018 rings true to me in the fact that Lewis went into that event with a Mercedes where he shouldn't have been anywhere near pole position. Ferrari should have locked that front row out, and he delivered arguably one of the greatest qualifying laps I think I'd ever seen. He was so much faster. I know they talked about Senna in '88 in the McLaren when he was like over 1.2 seconds faster.
When he says he actually believes, or not believed, he says it. He said it at the time that he had an out-of-body experience.
Yeah. It was brilliant.
Things like that are so inspiring.
And that was great for Senna. But in terms of what Lewis was able to do in that regard, I think it's a case of he just edges him in those regards. And I feel like, despite the fact that we didn't know what Senna could have achieved in the latter part of his career, I don't think we should take away from Lewis what he's achieved.
No.
Because what Lewis is doing now, let's be honest, the coronavirus is doing a better job of stopping Lewis from taking Schumacher's records than anyone else in the current grid.
When you said that to me, I was a tad upset.
But it's true.
It is true.
It's true. That's the reality of it. I expect Lewis to beat Schumacher's win records. He's already got more pole positions than him. The world championship record is definitely up for. I saw this when I was younger, and Schumacher had won his 7th world title at Belgium 2004.
Yeah.
We all looked at it as something that may never ever be matched, let alone beaten. And yet Lewis is very much capable, and he's got time on his hands. He's got the right machinery to not only match it but beat it. Do you know
that very far-fetched, but I believe that the guy that could go on to beat Lewis's record could well be Verstappen.
I don't think so.
You don't?
I think, yes, it's true that, I mean, we got to take a step back. Other than Nico Rosberg, the last 10 world championships and Jenson Button have been won by 2 guys. So the last 12 years, the championship's been won by 4 different drivers, 10 of those by Vettel and Hamilton.
Yeah.
Amazing talents. We had drivers like Alonso. Obviously, Jenson won a world championship. Nico won a world championship. Who, think what you want of Nico Rosberg, but he's a very high caliber driver when he was driving. And I think this goes to prove how good you really have to be to beat Lewis, even in equal machinery. And despite how people may feel about how that season ended, Nico was definitely well worthy of that world title that season. I know you, as a Hamilton fan, and some other Hamilton fans might disagree with me, but I do feel that the results Nico put in, yes, Lewis was still really good in that season, and unfortunately what happened to him, the engine problems he had, the reliability trouble, that is a huge factor. But I think the mental toll that Rosberg had to deal with to win that world championship.
That's why he retired, mate.
Possibly, he drove him to a point where he realised he can't do more than that.
No.
And he knew he'd have to do more than that to beat Lewis again. And he just didn't feel he had it in him. So, one and done. But
so do you think?
for me,
do you think the likes of Leclerc would have something to say about my original statement?
I think Max has got everything he needs to be a multiple world champion.
Yeah.
Having said that, I just feel the way the sport is going with these rule changes, this shake-up potentially, that there's a lot of competition. And in fairness, those rule changes can promote a change in where one team can absolutely dominate, like Mercedes have done the last 6 years, and Lewis has benefited from that, from 5 world championships.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to do that, and Red Bull did this as well in 2010. It took them a year, 2009, to get to that point, but the next 4 years they were dominant. I just don't feel that there's too much depth in strength of some of these top teams now that we're going to see something again like what's happening now with Mercedes. I genuinely believe that. I think once Mercedes stop dominating, there's too much depth from Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, particularly those three. Maybe McLaren if they come back, and possibly Renault if they stick around and get it right. And Racing Point, of course, the 2021 deal with Aston Martin, and then obviously Lawrence Stroll has bought more of a stake for less money because of what's happening with the financial markets related to coronavirus. That team's going to go up and up and up. So I just don't feel that there's going to be... I mean, Max is a great driver and he's clearly the best of this young cohort of drivers there. But I don't think it's cut and dry saying he's like another level compared to everyone else. I think there's so many good drivers and so many strong teams that Red Bull would have to produce an amazing, amazing car like Mercedes have done to do that. Or Max goes to somewhere else, like Mercedes or even Ferrari.
Well, look at the decisions that have gone off on tangent again. Look at this. Everyone thought that Alonso would be winning a whole lot more than 2 championships, but his decisions.
And that's an episode we're going to talk about, an alternate reality where Fernando Alonso makes the right choices in moving teams rather than the choices he did make and the right timing, like Lewis Hamilton has been so good at. But yeah, so I think to sum it up, I would say I think Senna had more about him all round, but I think at the same time, and this is an argument I would say with the Schumacher debate, I feel like you need to be better than just a guy that's brilliant behind the wheel to win world championships and do more than what Senna did. So I will say Hamilton just about to me.
Okay, yeah.
What about you? Because this would be an interesting one for you because you have allegiances to both as a fan.
I do. I think in a sporting sense, I'll say Lewis. I'd say on a almost spiritual level, I'd say Senna.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think that's what I'd go with. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Okay.
So you're going to read out the last question, Adam. It was, again, from your brother.
Oh. So, yeah, I've seen this question on here, and so bear with us on this. I'm going to have to explain some context for this one. So, he's asked, who's the better of the two, Michael Schumacher or Robert Dornbos? Now, for those of you hardcore F fans wondering about Robert Dornbos, who had test spells with Minardi and Jordan back in the early 2000s, it's not the same guy. Robert Dornbos, the one we're referring to, is a guy that races in an online esports league on PlayStation. And we're going to talk about the esports actually while we're on this subject. And the reason why my brother put this question for a joke is because in a race that I commentate on, in a league I commentate on, it's the Vision Racing League, or otherwise known as VRL PS4.
Well plugged.
You can follow them on YouTube, Hot Lap Mode, VRL PS4. It's a really good league, a lot of good young drivers, and I'm commentating on it, so what more could you want?
Beautiful plug-in. Beautiful.
So, it was the Italian Grand Prix this weekend that we did for the F2 race. We have 2 divisions, F1 and F2. Did the F2 race. And this fella who has the tag name Robert Dornbos was not doing so well in the race, decided to have a bit of fun because he was a lap down, and the cars ghost on this when you're a lap down, so you don't get in the way of other drivers and crash into them, which is good. On the F1 game, I should say, F1 2019 game, he put on a set of wet tyres on a dry track and went to the chicane, not the very anti-Razzafilio, but the chicane after that, and he went into the runoff area where Lewis Hamilton got forced off by Leclerc in the last race in Italy last season, and he started doing donuts.
Why not?
On wet tyres, because he was just having a bit of fun. And while on the stream, I was circling through the drivers, and I saw him doing it for a couple of seconds. And it literally has now become a living meme in the eyes of my brother now. So long story short, Michael Schumacher, just about. I would say.
Good answer.
Robert Boss in Italy or Michael Schumacher in Monaco 2006.
Oh.
When he parked it at Rascasse.
Get an image on the YouTube for that, mate. Get an image on the old YouTube.
So, so to move on, so esports, we did mention on this just now, that has a huge role to play now to fill this void.
Really important.
Now that we're starved and looking for Formula One content or even sporting content, something I do want to talk about. So for those of you fans that were eagle-eyed on this in the week, notice that organisations such as The Race hosted their own event where they had a combination of Formula One drivers like Max Verstappen, for example, former drivers like Esteban Gutierrez and Stoffel Van Dorn, who race in the Formula E series, and you had other drivers like Neil Yarni, Felix Rosenqvist, and a few others, and Jolyon Palmer was on commentary as well. So you had them, you had some sim racers, people like Jimmy Broadbent, famous YouTuber, was GT Sport commentator as well. Very, very successful in that community. He was racing in there as well. You had other drivers like Neil Yarni, race driver. You had sim drivers like Brendan Lee, two-time Formula One esports champion. And then you had other drivers, and also Rudy Van Buren as well, and the McLaren Shadow Drive, and I think the world's fastest gamer, I think James Baldwin, I think it was.
I think
he might have been in the other event. But yes, you had that, and you had some other people that were qualifying for the event, and it was a really great show. It had a couple of hits.
It was good, it was. Because I watched one of the races, I think they did one of the races and one that Verstappen was in.
Yeah.
And then I watched the one that Lando Norris was in. So the one that Lando Norris was in, Thibaut Courtois was in it, wasn't he?
Yes, so Veloci Esports had also done a similar event on Sunday, and they had an event called Not the Australian Grand Prix, or Not the Aus Grand Prix, and this is going to be a regular event, of course, until the season comes back, when it does. And they had a lot of good drivers in there. They had Lando Norris, obviously was the highlight driver, if you like, from Formula One.
He was the poster boy.
Yeah, poster boy in there. You also had you had some sim drivers, YouTubers as well, Team at Marduk, Arava as well, famous F1 YouTubers. Matt Gallagher from WTF1 was commentating on it as well, with some of the guys at Veloci. So I can't remember the main commentator's name. I was listening to it yesterday. I do apologise if you do listen to this. I can't remember your name. But no, it was a great job. It was a really great event. And amazingly, one of the biggest stars was Thibaut Courtois.
Sorry, it's so random, but yeah, it was actually quite decent.
The Real Madrid and Belgium goalkeeper in football, if you don't know, I'd had no idea the guy was a Formula One gamer, and he literally just told the guys, look, I'm interested. If you got a spot, put me in.
Yeah.
And he drove really well.
He was. What I saw he wasn't. I think he ended up in the midfield somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was like 11th overall. Just missed out on the points, but he was really good. He drove really, really well. And I should say Stoffel Van Dorn and Esteban Gutierrez. They were in the Veloci event, not the other one. I do apologise. They weren't in the race one. This is the one they were in. So
they both raced. That's right. Because Gutierrez is a reserve driver for Mercedes.
That's right. And he was. And Stoffel Van Dorn had ties to them via the Formula E programs. He drives for the Formula E team.
That's right.
And it was great. I think the point we're trying to make is that the events were really good. Of course, there's a lot to improve on, but then that comes with all these events. I commentate on online racing events and stuff like this because obviously I would like to be a commentator one day. I think or broadcasting in Formula One or racing in general, and that's something I've seen a lot of, and they did a really good job of it. And I guess in this time where we're not sure what's going on with Formula One world or even the sporting world, the virtual gaming community for Formula One in particular, there's a massive opportunity, and the race in particular have taken strides on this. Veloci Esports as well, they've taken something out of the F1 Esports series, which they may add something into. These guys, obviously they have their annual championships everywhere. They may decide to add more one-off races, and these events where you can combine people, real-life race drivers, sim racers, people that qualify for these events, and special guest celebrities like Thibaut Courtois as well. Who knows? There's so much potential for this, and I'm really excited, and I'm glad they did this. It was such a really good event. I just want to thank those guys from us at DNF1.
Because they gave us something, didn't they?
And also, guys, just to plug this in, if you do need a spare driver that's handy on the F1 game, I will say I might need a little bit of practice, but I am pretty handy around there. And I
Famous last words.
Well, you say that, but I reckon I could hold my own. I wouldn't mind having a ding-dong battle with someone like Lando Norris or Max Verstappen on those games. I'm pretty handy on there.
I'll do watch Lando Norris's Twitch channel as well. It's brilliant.
Oh yes. Do you know what's funny? Do you hear the bit we said about Tim McMurdoch?
Yeah.
Tim McMurdoch was going on about, oh my god, this is crazy, I'm going wheel to wheel with Max Verstappen and all that, and then he overtook him, and Lando goes, screw you! Well, just to respond to him afterwards. And he also jumped the start of the formation lap. Lando completely forgot. When on the formation lap, they were doing it on the online races, you could turn them on and off, and embarrassingly, Lando gets out of his grid slot. He was midway through the pack because he didn't qualify well. He was on medium tyres and everyone was on softs. But he's overtaken everyone. He's going, oh, what a start. This is great. Oh, wait, it's the formation lap. And then everyone starts laughing at him on the street. It's hilarious. Like, it's good. And it wouldn't be so embarrassing except for the fact that he's a current Formula 1 driver who should know that the formation lap comes first.
That's good to see.
But it's great stuff. I do recommend you guys watching it. And I do recommend as well, if you're interested, do watch the Vision Racing League and also Formula Euro League. I do some work with them as well. So Vision Racing League, it's Hot Lap Mode VRL PS4 on YouTube. Follow them on Twitter and Instagram as well as VRL_PS4 and Vision League Racing on Instagram. And also our partners at Hot Lap Mode as well, partners of VRL. So do give those guys a like and subscribe as well. It's a growing channel. A lot of great guys do a lot of good work and it's really exciting racing. I can guarantee that. And I'm on commentary as well. What more do you want, honestly?
You've been stockpiling with plugs, haven't you?
My royalty checks are coming in the mail, I'm not going to lie.
Well, I want to share.
Once this podcast is set up, gets much, much more professional, you're going to wonder how I'm getting this money. Yeah, well, I've got to try somehow. But you're wondering how it gets more professional. You'll see the money's rolling in like moolah.
I think that's a good time to wrap things up, don't you think?
Yeah, I'd say so. We've been ranting on for a while now. We've finally been able to talk about F1 stuff. So I think that's all that's left to say, guys, is upcoming episodes. We're still going to be doing this weekly, despite what's been going on with the coronavirus.
We're gonna try and keep things light-hearted because we understand that there's going to be a lot of people spending time at home going mad, pulling their hair out. So we're going to do our best to lift spirits, shall we say. And
we've got some ideas that we wanted to put into non-race weeks, but now that we're faced with a lot of non-race weeks now, because the winter break's been extended indefinitely. That's what we're calling it. We've got some really good ideas for stuff to put in, and obviously if there's stuff that you want us to talk about, do let us know on our social media pages. We're available on Twitter as DNF1_podcast, and also the same tag on Instagram, DNF1_podcast as well. So do follow us there. Do give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's DNF1 /podcast. Or is it #podcast? Well, it's DNF1 F1 podcast. You'll see it on there. It's on the it's gonna be on the image you'll see on the YouTube channel anyway throughout the video. So those are our social media. We're also available on YouTube, as I said. Give us a like and subscribe. We want to make more content for you guys. The only way we're going to be able to do that is if you like and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notifications button to be first to know when our episodes come out. And we're also available on our major podcasting platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Alexa TuneIn, and all the other ones you can think of. I think I'm just rounding them all off.
Seeing as you've plugged stuff throughout the episode,
yeah,
can I plug one thing?
Just one thing?
Visit my Cheap Park and Farm on the Isle of Dogs, people.
Yeah, if you're in the area,
there you go.
It's a really nice farm. I live down the road from there, but it's really nice. They've got cows. They've got cows, right?
Yeah, we have 3 Dexters.
Ah, I like cows.
Yeah.
Well, quickly become one of my favourite animals. Second to penguins, though.
We don't have any penguins.
You get some penguins in.
Well,
get some penguins in.
I'll have a word. It won't be listened to without a word.
But yeah, I think we'll end this episode here. So thanks very much for putting up with this. We did go on a bit longer than we would have liked, but
as usual,
yeah, we always seem to we never stick to a tangent. And even as I say that, we're going off and on.
We have a tangent for the tangent.
Yeah, I'm going to stop that now because we're going to go on forever. So yeah, thanks very much for listening in, guys. As I said, please follow us on social media where you can, like, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next week.
See you soon.
See you later.